Welcome back. I'm Anjanette Levy, and you're watching Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us on this Tuesday afternoon during the lunch break in the YNW Melly double murder trial. We left off with Mark Moretti, the lead detective in the case, on the stand. The state is still in direct examination, and joining us is Terry Austin of Law and Crime. She's down there covering the case for us. So Terry, bring us up to speed about what's been going on in the courtroom so far this morning.
Well, Anjanette, it's been a very interesting morning. It did start off earlier with the defense bringing up an issue. Apparently, Juvy's sister posted on, I guess, one of the social media outlets, and she said that she was going to harm Jamie King. And so that caused a big, issue in the courtroom. It wasn't anything that we got on tape, but it did happen this morning. It was on the record, and she has a bodyguard now. So that was one of the first issues that the court dealt with this morning. And it was interesting because the judge did basically say, if you needed more security, I can get it for you. Ultimately, it was determined that the security she had, the bodyguard, was going to be enough. So that was the very first thing, and it was quite interesting. And it was, I think something that was not expected as far as I'm concerned. But then obviously after that, Moretti got on the stand, and he did talk about the drive back, and forth as far as the crime scene was concerned. He talked about cell record data. He talked about, the 9807 phone. And as we were talking about earlier, they are trying to focus on that phone belonging to Melly and being registered to his mom, Jamie King. It is a small point in my mind because they have shown that multiple people have been using that phone. I think the other issue that was quite interesting were a number of videos that the prosecution showed this morning. And so, frankly, one of the videos was a documentary from YouTube, and it showed Melly, and it showed him being very pensive. It showed Juvy. It definitely showed Sack Chaser. And I thought it was more endearing to the defense, but it was shown by the prosecution. At the very end of that video, it said that Juvy and Sack Chaser had been shot. And so it was sort of a memorial for the two of them. So interesting morning all in all.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting and very scary about Jamie King feeling threatened by Juvy's sister. Apparently with the social media stuff, emotions obviously running very high in this case. Let's get to some of your questions now. Keep them coming on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Threads, TikTok, Facebook. We'll get to as many of them as we can. Our next question comes from Tammy Trigg from YouTube. And I feel like everybody could chime in on this one. Where did the two satchels disappear to? They were not found in the car, and Cortland did not have them, Linda. So you first on that topic.
Well, it's very interesting because that came up yesterday, I believe, during Travion Glass's testimony. But if these satchels were so important, why didn't the police look for them? Now they're saying, well, the satchels that Melly had and that Cortland had were gone. And, maybe they were thrown away, maybe they were thrown in the water, maybe they were thrown in the garbage, but the police didn't look for them. So what are we going to do? If I'm a defense attorney and they're trying to argue that those satchels contained weapons, I'm going to say, because you didn't look for them, you get a negative inference. You can't tell this jury that evidence, because you didn't find evidence, means that evidence was there to be found, and therefore you have to vote guilty, jury. I think it's an outrageous claim by the prosecution if they're going to go there if they never looked for them.
Mm-hmm. Brian, the thing about the satchels that I find interesting was the fact that if things unfolded the way Bortland said they did, with them leaving the studio and then they're involved in the drive-by and he arrives at the hospital with Sack and Juvy, should Cortland's satchel have been in the car at the very least?
Maybe. I don't know where he went from point A when the shooting happened, whether it was someone in the car, outside the car, to point B in the hospital. And I think I'm going to echo what Linda said. Prosecutors, when they do voir dire, when they speak to their jury, they often say, I have the burden. It's my job. I will carry it. And they hold it as a badge of honor. But then to flip it and say, hey, we don't have this fact, but can you go down this rabbit hole with me to then assume some negative inference? As a viewer, yes, I'm going to assume this and I'm going to assume that, and I'm going to say, hey, maybe he should have had the bag on him. Maybe the bag has this. But if the prosecution wants to take a person's life, because we're not just talking about guilt or innocence here, we're talking about potentially the death penalty. You cannot, in my mind, ethically do what this might be, saying, we never investigated, we never checked, we don't know the answer, we're just going to give you this inference, and please take away this person's life. It should not be the way that prosecutors operate.
Mm-hmm. Our next question is from Derek from YouTube, Terry, and I'll throw it over to you. Before the trial started, one of the witnesses said Melly got into the red vehicle and then now changed all of a sudden. Isn't that weird as well?
Well, it's not weird, I don't think. I think you have to just look at what all of the witnesses together are saying as far as those vehicles are concerned. And regardless of what the witnesses are saying, you see the video. So the red Mitsubishi has the 4 other individuals who got in that car, including Trevion Glass, and the gray car, the Jeep that everyone else got into is where, you know, Melly was, and Sack Chaser and Juvy and Bortland. So I think if you look at that video, we can certainly confirm that that's at least how that evening started. Brian brought up a great point, and it's something that I've been thinking about throughout the trial. We don't know what exactly happened after they got into that car. We know one destination subsequent to that was the hospital. We know another destination was Melly's house, where everyone apparently lived, and we know another destination was Frito Bang's house, but we don't know what happened in between exactly. So anything could have happened. I think we're going to have to rely on not just the witnesses, but put it all together and make sure that the video speaks too, so it's corroborating what others have said.
Courtney Weir from Facebook, Linda asks, so even if he used the phone, doesn't it mean it's his phone? And Fredo Bangs just made a song called Free Melly and specifically says he watched his dog go to trial over his cell phone. Do you think down the line, if he is guilty, they could use that information for an appeal?
Well, it's hard to use information that doesn't come into the courtroom, but there was that information that did come into the courtroom. And I do, you know, when we talk about the appeal and all, the defense, first of all, has experts. If they think those phone calls, by the way, were made elsewhere off different towers and all, they can bring those experts in. And so that's one of the things. So yes, what could it be used on appeal? Absolutely. But this whole idea that this phone is going to be the piece of evidence in this case that shows that Melly pulled the trigger, even if the phone is there, it doesn't mean he pulled the trigger because you have a co-defendant in the car. So that's the problem the prosecution has. Which of these two could have pulled the trigger if the jury even believes Melly was at the location? And I'm not sure they have sustained that burden of proof.
Our next question, Brian, comes from Instagram. It's exo_Nikki_ from Instagram, as I said. If Fredo Bangs allegedly picked up Melly after the incident, does the prosecution not have enough evidence to charge him with accessory after the fact, execute a search warrant on his home in order to get him to comply with a subpoena, especially since Glass testified that Melly changed clothes?
All right, so I'm going to try to pull it little by little. So
There's a lot there.
Yeah, so there's subpoena information, there's executing a search warrant, and accessory after the fact. So I'll do it in order. A subpoena would have to be some sort of, you're thinking there's going to be fruits of a crime. So aiding and abetting after the fact, maybe you're able to look into his car to see if there's any blood or evidence there. I think you might be able to get a subpoena because that threshold is so low, but you've got to do more than just having a fishing expedition as to what the judge may call it. So what do you believe you'll find simply by the fact that he drove him there? Is there any information that maybe the satchel or the merce, the man purse is in there? That may be enough, but you got to have some sort of corroborating evidence to suggest that, not just a good idea. And then when you're talking about, what is it, to charge him with accessory after the fact, he would have to know that the crime occurred, so it's about information. What did he know at the time that he drove him from location A to location B? And did that in some way assist or influence the crime or add to it in a means of like evading arrest or something to that degree? I don't think we have the facts there just yet. I would analogize it almost to like anyone picking you up. Like if I go and stole a Kit Kat bar from the store downstairs, and I got into a car with Linda, and we drove upstate and hung out for the weekend. Is she an accessory to that? Well, she would have to know that I stole what I did beforehand, and I don't see those facts there just yet. I think they would have to be developed if you're going to get to that point, but I think XO Nikki's quite the investigator and detective. I think you just need a little bit more to get to what they're thinking about.
Well, and I think we should note, too, there's been some discussion outside of the presence of the jury that the state has tried to subpoena some of these witnesses, and some of them haven't complied. And I believe Fredo Bangs is one of those witnesses. These people don't want to be involved in this. They don't want to be labeled a snitch. From TikTok, Terry, this comes from Jolene Gonzalez. She asks, if that was Melly's phone in the car, how was he able to drop his location to Fredo Bangs?
Well, I'm presuming if he dropped his location, it was prior to when he left the phone in the car, and he was in the car and dropping the location and then left the phone. I can't really answer that. It's a really difficult, question to figure out how it happened, but we do know that from the testimony before from the cell phone expert earlier, way long ago, that it was dropped, and Fredo did get his location and apparently did pick him up. But, it's hard to say. If he had his phone, he did it, and he probably did it in the car. There hasn't been any evidence as to where he was when that exactly happened.
Mm-hmm. Our next question comes from Styles1211 from Instagram, Linda. Question, what are your thoughts on the change of clothes, and why doesn't the person Melly was picked up by not have to testify? That's Fredo Bangs.
All right, let's start with the first one. Yesterday, when the change of clothes came up from Glass, because he was a recalcitrant witness for both parties, he didn't want to answer any questions. I thought that was a very important piece of evidence that the prosecution had. I thought, because trials come down, and I've said this a number of times, and guilty verdicts to one or two things. And the fact that he may have changed clothes, that supports an inference that there was a reason for him changing clothes, and the reason would be blood spatter all over his clothes in some way, or gunshot residue or something. So I thought that was an important piece of evidence. But again, you don't know why somebody could have changed clothes. So he goes to the house, as I said also, a lot of the rappers, a lot of people, not just regular rappers, wear, basketball shorts under their gym clothes and all. And you just take off those clothes, you get home, you take off those clothes, and you're in your gym shorts. So, that's the other evidence that would support innocence. So I'm not sure that Fredo could be charged because of that. I'm not sure you could subpoena him because of that. But you know what? The prosecution played hardball here, Anjanette. They actually charged Glass, if you recall, trying to avoid a subpoena. They charged him with obstruction in a way. So they could have done the same thing with Fredo if they thought he had important information.